guys, Erica here again. It's not flyable here in the Hawke's Bay on Sunday, so I'm actually going to be putting together a pretty quick show and tell on the strategic priorities. So this has come about because last night we tried to tee up a meeting with the Tasman Club, and what was all enthusiastic to begin with didn't actually turn up with enough people to warrant the few guys sitting there for a Saturday night, I should say. So executive call, I said, hey, let's not bother, and I'll do a recording so you can send it out to your people as you see fit. So it's done for Tasman, but I've made it public to everybody, so please share around. So a quick rundown, this is basically the show and tell of the strategic priorities that I've been talking to clubs around the country over the last couple of months. So why we're doing this is because you've probably seen, well, hopefully you've paid attention to the agenda for the AGM that's come out recently, and you'll see on there that there is the strategic plan, strategic priorities is listed in the agenda. So specifically, while this is not a remit, because to get a strategic priority was last year, but it is on the agenda today because I do want clubs to give a vote to which of the three options that are available. So while this is not going to be altering the constitution in any other way, so it's not another remit, this is to give the executive the direction in which to move forward on the strategic plan. So as we go through it today, I'll quickly just talk about how I came about the strategic plan, my ideas, the generation of what I came up with, and we'll see what we can do. So normally, again, this is done at the club level on something, and it's really good to have sort of interplay with members, but obviously I'm going to be speaking to myself, but there's always the opportunity that if nothing is clear or you've got more questions for me, send me a text, drop me a comment, drop me an email, and I'm more than happy to get on the phone or to write a quick 5-minute thing. So again, thanks for taking the time to do this, and this is going to be fairly off the cuff, and I'll try and do some editing and put documents in, but it's only my second try, so bear with me. So let's get started onto everything. So what I'll be going over in this little recording is the number of documents that you would have received, your club would have received out from the association a few months ago. So the first thing I'm going to be going over is a document that was called Research and Ramblings. Now this generally explains how I came about with the end product of the strategic priorities. And it sort of explains my thinking. It's a very free-flowing document. It's attached to this email that this goes out with, and it basically just as an overview of where I started looking at things. So this is what I'm going to be using to go through on the talk here. So if you can't be bothered sitting and listening to me, go through and read that document because it really sets out, and hopefully it should show you my thinking on things. So let's get into it. So as we all know, at the last AGM, the executive's task was putting together a strategic plan for the association. And I got tapped on the shoulder and said, hey, make a start on it. So that's what I did. So my background, many years ago in a different life, I had a corporate finance background. I've been involved in a lot of research and writing of endless annoying reports and all those sorts of things you have to do when you're a grown up and all of that. So that's probably why I got flagged for it. Also, I'm self-employed, so I'm used to keeping myself on track, though not as much as I'd hope, and also looking at a few other things. So Duncan asked me to have a go at it, so this is what we've come out of it. So I obviously have my own opinion on what I think the association should be doing and what members expect, but again, that's just my opinion. So to come up with a way to try and understand a generalised view, where I started was reading over 10 years of AGM notes, reading over 10 years of monthly executive notes, all the special meetings and everything that was available on the resources and the archives as much as I could find. So it was a hefty amount of reading and going through. And so from there, I basically thought, well, I've got to mark this up somehow to get a real idea. So I literally did a simple count. just to put some numbers on things, just to get an idea. So one of the things that is most obvious about how I started was I did a simple count going over topics. So it's included here, and as you can see, so for instance, as a quick example, for instance, if I'm reading through the notes and there was a mention or a topic, say, on the Airborne magazine, that part of the AGM or that part of the meeting would get a mark, a count on money, administration, general, and publicity. So, for instance, if something was talked about in the meetings for CAA, it would get a count under regulatory, legal, admin, operational, procedural, safety, and airspace. So that's how I tried to quantify the topics that were covered without being too specific, and just to get a general overview, because obviously when you're reading a lot of this stuff, it's done in conversational form, nothing's really marked up, some things are clear, some things cross over. So this is what I did to form a general start point to see really what were the topics at hand. And so as you can see in this table presented, that it's not without surprise that over the last 10 years in the AGM, the most talked about topic was administrative general, that's how we do what we do, money, admin procedural, and then the fourth one was safety. Whereas on the executive meetings, which is the monthly ones the executive hold, over the last 10 years, including other special meetings and other notes I could find, again, not surprising, administration general was always a hot topic, and number 2 was safety. So at an AGM level, obviously how we go about things and what do we spend our money on is usually the hot topic. In the executive meeting, yes, we are there to administer the business of the association, but the second item that was most talked about was safety. So that's quite interesting, because really on the monthly basis, safety, which is one of the key components of the OPM and is a key factor in how the association runs, safety is right up there. So this is where we've got to start. So as you can see from this table here, this is where I sort of started looking at what we do and how we do it. So obviously that's at the top of people's minds. So from there, I started reading through, and one of the things that struck out to me, and part of research and ramblings document, is I've casually titled this, show me the money. So without no surprises, how the topic that most comes to mind over what members are asking for or what they're interested in is how the association is managing their money. How we spend it, what we spend it on, the bones of what we do and what we administer. So this is Mabel in the background. Mabel made an appearance in the last video, so she's joined us again, so please excuse any sounds in the background. So right, So reading over things, and again, this is anecdotal, and again, this is also from conversations I've had with people over the years, there is often a lot of discussion over the management of the money. And more specifically, over the last 10 years, is what are we actually paying for and how is that being spent? And what I can see is recently, in recent sort of 5 years' time, the questions that are coming out and being spoken about is how much is this costing us? There's been concerted amounts to discuss the cost of the honoraria for the executives, the fees given to the president, etc., like that. So there's been a real talk around that, and more pointedly is an effort to reduce that amount. That, whether it happens or not, it doesn't seem to, there is a questions of it, but there has been reduction in the money that's put forward to the executive and things like that. So it's obviously a topic that gets brought up all the time. And absolutely, and what I can see over the last 10 years is there has been an open dialogue. The executives of the past have welcomed investigation and ideas into how we're managing the money. But one of the things that comes through the document, reading through, and what I think is not addressed and what members seem to be missing, is exactly what the executive and the association has achieved for members, but it's the value of what's been achieved versus what things cost. So going over the last 10 years, I have been astounded, and when you really stand back and look at it, is how much the association has achieved for not a much money. A lot of what we do, and a lot of what we keep doing, is made possible by volunteer hours. And the talk of what goes on in the meeting minutes is like, what is this costing us? Where's the money going? Rather than reflecting on, look at the value that we have been able to achieve for that spend. And it's one of those things that I believe we can only look at budgets and see the money going out, but there's not been enough communication to our members to really express how much we have achieved for very little money. And that to me is really what's missing when we start talking about general administration and budgets and money and things like that, because we have been conditioned as members to not pay or to keep costs incredibly tight and very low, but yet we are not recognising the absolute amount of success and value that has been achieved for that. And I would say that is down purely to the volunteer hours and resources that people are putting in. Assessment. One of the things that really struck out to me was out of the 2012 AGM minutes, a closing speech from the then executive and President Zen. And I'm going to put it up here. Hopefully it'll be up so you guys can read this in large print. But one of the things that, again, comes up time and time again as you read through the notes and the AGM notes and the executive meeting notes is the amount of volunteer effort and resource that is put into this association. But that is not recognised. And this comment, which was specifically put in the 2012 AGM meetings, has really struck me. And it talks to this point, as you can see here. At this point, Trevor Layton asked for the floor. Trevor addressed the floor and then the following cautionary tale. He said he'd served under 3 CEOs and they all seemed to leave with the same experience. They were left feeling beaten up, overworked, resented. He said to the floor that this time the clubs and members at large stopped treating the executive in such a way as they are one of us, and it is not right to abuse people who are giving up their time for the benefit of all. Zen thanked Trevor for these frank comments and decided to say a few more words. He said that he had found that, despite his best intentions and determined effort to treat everyone fairly and neutrally in his role as president, he had nevertheless found himself alienated from friends, made enemies, and lost out on flying days, to say the least. This brought him a certain degree of sadness, and he could honestly say that it was total and unwelcome surprise. He said that regardless of all of our different opinions, we should all remember that we have in common our love of flying, and this should be the uppermost in our minds. So that was something that that really struck me, that someone actually made that point. I wasn't flying at this stage and didn't come across this, but this sentiment is clearly evident when you read through 10 years of meeting notes. And again, this is something that our members may not be aware of or may not consider as part of actually what they are purchasing with their membership dollars. Now, over the last couple of years, there has been a shift to more of a professional standing. And as you know, we now have a salaried CEO position. And again, there were questions. This was, considered controversial, or, some people didn't want it to happen, and it does cost a lot of money. But I believe that because of the environment that recreational flying is moving in, we needed a position that reflected our growing professionalism, and it also enabled us to have someone who can react in a more timely fashion to things that come up. So I think overall the position has been successful, but I do think it has left members wondering really what's happening with the association. So possibly, I believe that there's been a disconnect between what members are seeing, what the executive are doing, or understanding what the role of the executive is, And a lot of things are being front-footed by the CEO, and we may be left with members saying, well, what are we doing all this for? Why are we paying for all these things if we've got a CEO who's doing it all? What's the point of how it's set up? And again, this goes to the issue of understanding and valuing what an executive board represents to members and how it's done. In my opinion, and again, this is my opinion, that the CEO position is essentially a tool of the executive. And the executive is basically the representation of the members. So to me, the CEO is a tool of the executive, and the executive works on behalf of the members. So we are instructing the CEO, and this is how we get things done. However, there has been, I believe, a real disconnect in explaining to our members really what we're doing. And this is when we're coming up, the first point that pulled up out of the strategic priorities is meaningful communication. So all of what I've been talking about goes to the fact that there has been communication. We send out, all of our meeting notes and everything's published and things like that, but it hasn't actually addressed communicating well with our members to truly express and to explain what the association, what the executive do for members, and more to the point, what we achieve for them by what we do. So one thing which came up first and foremost is that there is not an effective and meaningful internal communication. So for the first priority that came to mind, things we have to work on, that we have to address, is internal communication. That's the first thing. This leads us into the second most talked about topic. Again, no surprises, money. So over the last few years, actually the last 10 years I could say, reading over the notes, money is always a hot topic. And it comes down to, there's all talk about what our membership fees are going up, how much things are increasing, what extra we're going to have to pay. And something that I was amazed about is really how little our fees have increased over the last 10 years. It is not much by comparison to Australia, but we'll get to that in a minute. But looking over the last 10 years, our fees really haven't dramatically increased, but yet we are still providing so much success and value to our members. It's quite impressive. But again, we are a self-funded organisation. We have to be aware about where our money's coming from, and start thinking about our financial viability, forecasting projects and ideas and things that are coming up in the future. And again, I'm not just talking about the next 12 months. I'm talking 3, 5, 10, 15 years out. We now have to start understanding and having that conversation about what is a viable organisation and what are our viabilities. How are we going to survive in the future? So, and this is the dirty part of the discussion, is money. So going over the financial records over the last 10 years, I started thinking, well, it's about time we see if we can graph and visualise a lot of things that are going on. And again, the numbers that are presented, the charts that are presented here, these are not audited. In no way, shape or form can you make any financial decision based on what I'm presenting. So that's just me as an ex-finance person saying, don't take this to the bank. Do not make any personal financial decisions on what I'm presenting. So over the last 10 years, there has been a number of changes to the accounting definitions of how our books have been done. So when I do these charts, there is a significant, the data doesn't run true. And I'm sorry, I was not going to go through all of the last 10 years and do an audit and readjustment and reweight averages and all that sort of stuff. So the data that I'm showing here, it's not as nice as I'd expect, and that's because in the last 3 or 4 years there's been a change in the accounting methodology about how things are. It's all there, the money's all there, but it's just how it's presented has changed dramatically between different data sets. So with that being in full disclosure, let's start looking at it. So what I thought I'd do is I'd chart up full membership. So full membership is just people who are full members. That doesn't include students or visitors. So if we look at the last revenue by full membership from 2011, it's fairly steady. It's going, increasing upwards. It is what it is. And then we apply a year on year. So that's the energy or the momentum of the increases that we're showing. So a year on year trend, that's how things are growing. We're looking at, again, you can see from the adjustment to the accounting function, it is quite different. There's a big drop. But I would say that it's just gently trending up. And if we apply a trend line to the information, it's actually more telling. So what that shows you is that over time, the revenue gained from full membership is pretty flat. So depending on your outlook on things, a flat line can either be stable or stagnant. And both of those things I don't think are good. And this goes on to say that we have to think on full members, what are we actually bringing in? So then the next thing I charted was total income. So total income, again, disclaimer on the methodology, on the data sets and things like that. Again, don't take it to a bank. This isn't audited. This is just try to visualize the next stage of what we're doing. So if we look at total income, which does include visitor numbers and students, and again, we've had a few weird years on what also is coming on income because of COVID. So we definitely haven't had the visitors, but I believe student numbers are way up. So we've got to sort of see on total income how we're doing. So overall, again, it's steady. It's nothing dramatic. Year on year, it's steady, and total income trend line trending upwards, but it's not a real steep climb. So again, it's close to stable or stagnant, but it is what it is. And of course, that's no surprise. So but then, as we all know in life, let's look at total expenses. So again, disclaimer, there's been a change of it, blah, 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 blah. But what you can see is that, and we know this from everybody's life and everybody's out doing things outside of paragliding, costs keep going up. And costs do not stop. And if you look at a trend line, that's quite a steep line. So if you're a very basic and obvious assumption to do is if income is static or stable, but yet expenses are climbing, there's going to be a shortfall. So a couple of things you can look at. If this is on the broad basis, what do? Either we start paring back what we're paying on, what we're paying for, what we're doing, or we increase membership fees. Again, we are self-funded. Now, if you've got, as historically I have seen in the research that I've done, people don't like their fees going up. People don't. People don't like to pay more than they are, and people are feeling that what they're paying for is too much already. And again, this goes back to the first option, which is they're not seeing the value in what they're getting for their money, which again is, I think, is an issue that we're going to address with the communication. But again, I think it's a case of that people are going to have to start realising how we fund ourselves as an organisation is now going to start dramatically thinking about, well, what are we actually funding? What do we spend our money on? And if we don't want our memberships fees to dramatically increase to keep pace, do we get more people in to spread the load? So I started looking at that. So the next chart we're going to look at is I did some incredibly basic forecasting. And again, please, the accountants and the loss adjusters and all those people who are better than numbers than I am will just rip these to shreds. But again, these are just super basic, unaudited, unchecked data and incredibly simplistic forecasting done on the accounts that I've gone over. So let me take you back a bit, because one of the things that, again, I consider, and again, everybody's financial situation is different. I pay my time, to fly in New Zealand costs what it costs, and I do that. But one of the things that struck me after travelling the world and spending a lot of time in Australia, exactly how cheap our membership fees are. It is quite staggering when you compare it to our nearest neighbours in Australia. And again, I will harp on this. What our fees cost compared to what we achieve for our members is stunning. It really is. We really do a lot for our members, and I don't think members actually appreciate the amount of work that goes in to keep free flying free, because it's not free. A lot of work goes on, and again, this is the conditioning of members that we keep, that discussion on, no, we can't increase fees, things cost too much, but yet they don't see the value on what is achieved for them. So that's something we really have to address. So that's the first option. But going back to comparative membership fees. So just chatting with my friends in Australia, I think this year the main body association fees for Australia in Australian dollars are $350. Now, for instance, if your club is Canungra as a club are charging $200 annual fees. So say, for instance, your main club's Canungra, you're paying $550 Australian dollars a year. But that only gets you flying at Canungra. If you go to another club, you're having to pay visitors' fees. So compare that to New Zealand. And again, people can say, well, there's more people in Australia, they do a lot more. Exactly, it's hard. But just to put it in a dollar as literally what you are forking over, when you see what the fees potentially could be and what other people are paying, then you look back at what New Zealand is charging, what our association has been able to keep ticking over and running for a relatively small amount each year. It is stunning. So that's my little rave on that. So what I did is I started to apply, well, we have to get our heads around what's going to happen in the future and how we are going to keep running. One of the key things that I struggled with, and again, there is information out there, I just did down and dirty analysis, but from my experience of the resources available to executive members and again other people, I couldn't really get an overtime clear indication of what our membership is. So what we're talking about membership, again, I'm not talking about money at this stage, but it's the key understanding of what our membership numbers are. So talking with other guys in the club, on the executive who've had a lot more experience than I, we generally are saying we have a constant membership of about 1,200. So one of the things we have to look at is 1,200 enough to keep things ticking over? What is a sustaining number? And this goes to the bigger picture of trying to understand the health of our membership, the understanding of where we're coming from, or if we're going to grow, if our numbers are pegging back, and all those sorts of things. So I have to admit, I tried unsuccessfully to get historical data on the literal numbers of how many we are. So again, talking with others anecdotally, we're saying 1,200. So what I started to do was to actually go back on a couple of years to try and get that numbers by using the full income. So basically just took the full income each year, divided it by the cost of a full membership and try to work it back that way. So from the chart you can see here, and again, these are not audited numbers, they've not been checked, but on average, it goes anywhere from 1,200 to 1,000. So I think the anecdotal discussion with the people on the exec saying 1,200 is about our average membership. There could be more, there could be less, but that's how I've come up using the 1,200 membership level. So trying to get a forecasting idea of what's happening and using 1,200 members as a benchmark, we're then going to start to look in the future how we can start forecasting to get an idea of what might be happening. And again, this is all supposition, this is all just out there. So I would be saying that costs to increase about 15% a year, every year. They're going to go up 15%. They might go up, might go down. And so applying that, I would like to say that our membership, again, this is not what's going to happen, this is just a forecasting idea to put it in perspective, that over the next 4 years, our membership would increase to 350 a year over the next 4 years. And that to look at that, how that's going to affect on purely just big numbers. So as you can see from the very basic forecasting I've presented here, is that full membership and versus total expenditure. If we look at heading out to 2024-25, even with increasing costs at 15% and taking our membership up to 350 within 4 years to take us out that far, we're still going to be running short on money. We are not funding potentially what we're going to be doing. So that brings in the bigger picture of, is 1,200 members, full-time, full-paying members, is that sustainable? Do we kind of realise if we're doing what we're doing, but yet costs are increasing and $350 isn't going to cover it, what do we do? So there's a couple of things. The most obvious thing is get more members. This is quite a controversial topic. There are people who are absolutely chomping at the bit to say, no, we are not having, we're already maxed out. That's it, no more. Things are almost too crowded as it is. And I appreciate there are some people that feel that way. And this leads on to other issues of land access and restrictions and things like that. These are coming down the pipe. I do appreciate there are general concerns. But if we can take those feelings out of it and we look at our model that we are self-funded, if we only have 1,200 people and they're only prepared to pay X, but yet our costs are going up Y, how are we going to keep being viable? And then people say, well, we've got capital reserves. Yes, the association has capital reserves, but I tell you what, those capital reserves will be bled out very quickly, if we have to start tapping into the reserves to pay for things, which at the moment is very generously covered by volunteer hours. A prime example of this is the work that's been going on through the dock concessions, and there's a number of wind farms coming up and things like that, that a lot of what has been presented on behalf of the association has actually been done by volunteer hours and heavily discounted fees from our association lawyer, awesome guy, Oliver, who's a hang glider, so big up to the hang glider lawyer fraternity out there, has provided so much skill and professional services. If it's not free, most of it is, but it's done incredibly heavily discounted. And if it hadn't been for people like Oliver and other people who give their time and their resources free, our capital reserves would be bled dry very quickly. The reality of operating in this heavy regulatory environment is, I had no idea until I joined the executive how much it takes to keep free flying free. And the reality is that this association has only been successful predominantly down to the amount of volunteer time, energy and resources that have been put at it over the years. And we're getting to the stage that we cannot, in all good conscience, understand that our association is going to survive based on volunteer resources alone. We just cannot sustain it. And I don't think it is at all viable, and it goes to the bigger picture of what are we about? And we have to start having that discussion. So if we look at, again, just the stupid forecasting, if we keep it what we're doing and we only take our fees up to 350, we're going to run out of money. We won't be self-funding. There's going to be a shortfall. And this is the understanding that we have 1,200 every year. Because one of the things that also came up, and this came out of discussions from the executive, is looking at the sustainability and the viability of our membership role and understanding what is going to keep us going. Because one of the things that come up, we may have 1,200 members, but we may only have 1,000 members who are paying their dues and flying. But we might have a percentage of pilots out there who are still flying but don't pay. We don't know that. And we also may have an issue of people who are, dare I say, retiring out of the membership or out of free flight, that won't renew their licenses, or this is something we can look at members as a resource as well, because we've got a lot of guys and girls, sorry, I use guys in a very generic way, that have a lot of experience and valuable knowledge within the free flight community, who may be getting away from active flight and are maybe signing out. So we're actually losing membership resource from our little 1200 role, that it's valuable information that we're not going to get back, and we want to keep those people in. So there's lots of big questions, and it is the down and dirty thing to start looking at money as a place to have that conversation about what is what is going to make us survive. So it opens up a lot of wide-ranging questions, and again, this is quite controversial, that I personally believe that we have to do more investigation and more understanding about what is a membership role that keeps us viable. And my suggestion, or my research and my thinking, is that the current way of what we're doing things and the current expectations of members in regards to how much it costs, membership costs, we have to address it, because if we're doing what we're doing, it's not feasible. It just isn't. So if we've got a membership who don't want to pay increased fees, the option's clear. Either we strip out the association, we claw back our expenses way down, so we keep costs down, and I can hand on heart say, the executive, we work very hard we agonise over every sort of allocation of funds. We're incredibly aware of it. But if we're stripping things out to keep costs down, it then goes to, well, what are you actually buying for your membership dollars? And what I can tell you is, as a personal example, for instance, this strategic plan, if you remember at the last AGM, it was allocated $5,000 from the budget. I can tell you that no money from that $5,000 has been touched. Nothing has been spent from that $5,000 and all the work that I've done. And that $5,000 stays in the pot. So it just goes back into the pot, it doesn't get done. I can also personally talk to the honoraria. So each year, I believe it's $1,500 for the executive members. So this year, I've done no travel to clubs, haven't done anything, I haven't even got an extra toner for the work all the printing I'm doing on this work. So personally, I have not made a claim against the $1,500 that is allocated in the executive. That also stays in the pot. So when members actually, and again, all these figures, when you go over the budget and present it at the AGM, all those things are there for members to understand about where their money is going, but it goes to the bigger picture of understanding how much is actually done for a very little spend. And the reality is, and you probably see this in your own clubs, is that it's the same people put their hand up to do the work all the time. And it's the same people who go out to volunteer or stand on their own clubs' boards and things like that. And we're getting to the stage that you're going to have complete burnout, or just nobody wants to stand up and do anything, because it takes their time, it takes their effort, there is no reward. But yet there are people who always do it, who are keeping this association running over the years. We're not talking just in my 12 months on the executive. Over the last 10 years, the same people's names keep coming up. And this is what we have to realise, is that we're going to get to a stage soon where we're going to get burnt out of volunteers, and we're going to have to start paying. I would argue that there are ways that we can change it up, and this is what I'm going to talk to in the next option and the next sort of thing. But again, this is not a short-term position. This is something that I would call is legacy building. This is when we have that talk about really looking hard about what are we going to leave or create with the association for future. This is not for my generation, this is for the next. This is 5 years away, 10 years, 15 away. But if we don't start having that discussion now, and the understanding of what things really cost, if we have to start paying for it, if we can't rely on volunteer resources, what things are costing and how we are going to fund that. So that's really what this section has been about. So the second priority is about the membership, funding and growth. Now, there could be growth, meaning the growth of resources, as in the money that we have to spend. Growth could be in the resource of people, energy that we have bringing in. And growth, meaning the success and long-term viability of the association. So that's the second priority I'm going to be working on. Integral to the association is the OPM, the Operations Procedures Manuals. And everybody should be aware that this is our working document. This is our how-to manual. And the prime factor, and again I'll read from the OPM here, is the prime factor in guiding all decisions of the Executive Council is safety. It is the policy of the NZHGPA to maintain high standards of safety and excellence and practice that are in accordance with the civil aviation rules and this manual of approved procedures. So that is the first thing that comes out of the OPM, and without a doubt, as it clearly sets out there, and even just an everyday thing, safety is our prime mover. It's our prime concern. We want to keep our members safe. We want to understand the environment of which the free flight environment that we're all working in and participating in. And also the regulatory demands, the changing demands that are coming into that sector. So without a doubt, again, it's pretty obvious, safety has got to be one of our strategic priorities. So one thing I'd like to point out is over the last 10 years, there has been a real flow through when you actually read through all the things that have come into place over years that are now coming to fruition, that are now being sort of bundled and put together. Quick, come in. So over the last, sorry, I've got the dog wanting to come in. So over the last 10 years, that there's been a lot of work done by various groups, various individuals with a lot of experience. And again, this comes down to volunteer hours, volunteer resources who are championing and working towards our primary function of the safety. Now that could not have been done without volunteers. And again, this comes down to, this is stuff that happens. This is the value of what members get from what's gone on. So over the last decade, the regulatory and professional standards that have come down the pipe, that we've had to address, that we've had to move on to keep us flying, have slowly increased the demands on the association, and we've met them. We've fallen over in some things, there are some things still left to do, but we as an association are very, it shows over the last 10 years how serious that is for us. And without a doubt, it has to be serious. But the work that's gone on is quite staggering. And a lot of that has come into play, again, by concerned volunteers, people have stepped up and put up ideas and development. So one of the things that's come out that we should all be aware of is the EARS reporting system. So this is a way of reporting incidents and accidents and concerns. Now, what I want to say to members is this isn't just a puddle of numbers. Your involvement with that system as a member, if you have an incident and something you want to make aware of, it does go somewhere. It's just not numbers. It is vital in actually, strengthening and working on our understanding of our safety requirements in there. So we have to appreciate members putting in things, and it's something we really want to encourage. And again, this is something that's developed over time. We need to keep it up. We need to utilise it. A lot of the information is recorded, and it's being managed and designed by Hamish Dicker, awesome volunteer, putting stuff in. We're getting to a stage that we are being able to really utilise the information that our members have given them towards safety changes, to make sure that we are facilitating and understanding incidences and applying what we know. And again, this is down to volunteers, and it really is, sort of part of the fabric of what the association is. So this is a core feature of our strategic priorities, is to support and develop new safety and things like that. So without, it seems obvious, it does, but safety has to be a strategic priority, and it's one that's really important. And I'd like to say to members, don't get flippant about putting in your details and things like that, because it does go somewhere. It does really guide and inform one of the requirements we have to do in our industry, and it's really important. So thanks to everybody that puts it out there, and it's something that the executive and the CEO, we all work towards. Safety is our priority. So again, no surprises there, but it's now just moving on to like, how are we going to sort of get these things out? So safety, research reporting, and also outreach. So we have to make sure that our members are understanding what safety is for them, how they're important to the association, to bring back that safety message and to throw it out there. So without a doubt, safety. So coming to the end of the research and ramblings document, the last topic is promotion. Now this was, or could be seen as, quite controversial, and there are people out there going, oh, we don't need to promote, we've got enough people, we're all full. But I think it goes to the bigger picture, and when I think about this is the long-term sustainability. This goes towards growth. This goes towards funding. This is actually something that I believe should be a long-term goal for the association, and it's to do with the promotion and the perception of free flight in this country. So if we look at across all disciplines of free flight, so you've got everything from like sailplane, skydiving, paragliding, hang gliding, all those sorts of disciplines, we operate in, we're considered marginal, we're considered extreme, a select few, but we're actually observed by the public. We're highly visible, and it's impressive. Let's not, it's impressive what we do, and to the average Joe, it's unusual. It's seen as something exceptional, which it is. I mean, who else gets to fly? But the problem with that is we could be considered marginal. So we're only ever going to appeal, and again, let me clarify this. There is promotion for membership. If we talk about membership to the second option, which is like, how are we going to fund ourselves and what's going to happen, there is promotion for new people to join the sport and things like that. But there is also the promotion of the sector to change perception. So what I want to talk about here, and one of the things that I really think we have to come to grips with, and it'll flow on to other things down the line, is looking at the perception and the promotion of free flight in an effort to change perceptions of how we are perceived in New Zealand. Because I think if we look at how our sector is perceived in the country and how we look at changing that, and I won't say normalise it, or possibly normalise is the word to use, or we make it more readily acceptable or more readily understood, I believe in the long term this is going to affect how our association can start changing and developing and looking at different funding and sourcing of future growth outside of self-funding. So let me talk you through it. So trying to think about how things could move, or trying to figure out sort of other areas, other sports have been accepted and adopted and considered mainstream. And if you consider, and I can only sort of think of myself in regards to my discipline, paragliding, anywhere in Europe, France, Austria, Bulgaria, Slovenia, all that thing, paragliding, very common. I'm not saying that thousands of people do it, but compared to us, yes, thousands of people do it. But it's the understanding of the discipline, the understanding of the sport, and seeing it actually makes it an everyday thing. And I think for New Zealand, I think for us to move as an association, to move to a more successful sector, we have to start making inroads into how we are perceived in the New Zealand psyche. Because at the moment, we are considered an extreme sport. So being an extreme sport, we are going to be limited on in regards to changing or accessing funding sources or different arrangements for financial gain to keep us running. Who's going to want to fund an extreme sport? It's going to be marginal. We're not going to be able to change or to get acceptance outside of Red Bull. And we're not all Red Bull athletes. We that type of thing. So what I started to look at and started to think towards is how we can project what we do to the everyday person. So it got me thinking. And I looked at what mountain biking worldwide has become. So if you consider where mountain biking started in the 70s, it was considered an extreme sport. There were these bunch of, and this is off apparently a famous mountain biking book that charts the history. So it came in the 70s in Northern California when these hippies, which, crazy people who jumped on a single bike with no gears and tore down a hill. The most dangerous thing ever. Crazy off-road, and it was extreme. And that was in the 70s. And if you look at where mountain biking is today, worldwide, it is one of the most widely accepted, understood, everyday things that's out there. It is, because everybody can ride a bike. And I'm not saying everybody's going to take up jumping off a hill, but originally the perception of mountain biking, and that's not road biking, that's not riding a bike as a kid, mountain biking, off-roading, was extreme. It was terrifyingly dangerous in the 70s and early 80s. But if you look at where it is considered now, everybody will understand what mountain biking is. Everybody probably has a mountain bike. But that doesn't mean that everybody's going to tear off down the side of a hill, but it's the acceptance and the understanding of the activity is normalised. It's nothing special. It's impressive when you see it done, and those crazy downhillers, good on them. Or even those people who go up hills, good on them as well. But it is that perception that it is an everyday activity. It's not an extreme group. There are extremes within the group, but the general idea is that it's commonly accepted. So when I did a few Google searches, mountain biking New Zealand, we open up to the 100% New Zealand, first cab off the rank, the 100% New Zealand experience, showing mountain biking. And anyone who's flown in the South Island down Queenstown, hang gliders, paragliders, tandem operators, that view on that opening page is exactly where we fly. We are operating in the same environment, but yet we are considered completely different. So if you look at the editorial text on this page, again, it's written, albeit for the tourist, but it talks about, as we just say here, it found in almost every corner of New Zealand offering rides for all abilities, interests and itineraries. Now, that just shows you how accepted it is by Joe Public. Yes, you can be extreme, but it's not considered anything different. I believe that the free flight sector should be working towards this acceptance. And why I say that, and yes, I've heard people say we're not going to be as busy as mountain bikers, we don't want thousands of people doing it. And the reality is we won't have thousands of people doing it. But it's the perception of how we are received or how we are looked at that is what I want to change. Because I believe, for example, there should be areas for relationship building. funding relationship buildings within a lot of regions, and we should be able to access a lot of that regional funding if the perceptions of what we do is changed. But at the moment, free flight is considered marginal. Why would any business or any government or any regional council want to put money into a dangerous marginal sport? It's just not warranted. But when you actually look, when we say dangerous, mountain biking and bike accidents are huge compared to paragliding and hang gliding. Because yes, more people do it, but it's the acceptability of it. Now, again, this is not going to change overnight. This is not going to promotion of this free flight sector to Joe Blogs is not going to have an influx of 5,000 people who throw off their mountain bikes and want to become paragliders or hang glider pilots. But it is the change of the perception that we need to promote. So that's what one of the things is I'm looking at is a long-term view to change the perception of free flight with Joe Public. So from extreme to everyday. And I mean, that's the worst tagline going, but it's the emphasis of what I'm getting at that I think the association should be working towards. So a case in point. So one of the areas which I looked at, which I thought was a really good program, and I think it's something that could be easily achieved, that could go a long way to starting that connection with community and connection with regions, is a campaign that was run out of Australia by the Victorian Hang Gliding and Paragliding Association, and it was primarily aimed at getting more women directly into paragliding. They had a lot of state funding and federal funding to run this program, but it was run out of one of the clubs over there, and it was called the Let's Get You in the Air event. And there's a really great video, and I'll put a link into the email, and I can run a bit now. So what it was designed to do was the local club got together with the tandem pilots. They promoted the event saying, if you're a woman and you want to come down and try paragliding, they had a sausage sizzle, and it ran over a couple of weekends. So what this did, and it was kind of like a hearts and minds type event, it got a lot of women to experience paragliding. But so I'm not sure how many people they actually increased their numbers by, but it was a community outreach event that did so much towards changing the perception of a sport by exposing people to it and inviting people in to share something that we enjoy. And that's the kind of promotion that I think over time that we should be looking at doing as an association, because we need to shift how we are perceived in this environment. And I think if we start to change that idea of what we are, it's going to open up a lot more opportunities to change up how we fund ourselves. For instance, like just as Raglan has a famous surf break and Blenheim has amazing wine, why isn't there nothing to say that, say for instance, and I'll put up the things here, there's actually a big a picture of me in the council chambers and part of our sister city promotion of Hawke's Bay. Now, each regional council and each local body should have a budget within itself to promote activities to the community. Why can't we create relationships with councils and government bodies that promote free flight as a tourist destination, as a resource to an area, which we're clearly promoting here, but they wouldn't put any money towards it because we are considered an extreme sport. And I believe this is something that we have to start shifting towards. So happy to talk to a lot of people about this, but to understand that it's a outward-looking view to shifting perceptions about the free flight sector, I believe this is something the association should be actively putting in place now. And this is a a long-term plan. And it's something that is part of the development, I believe, is essential in keeping not just our association, but the free flight sector as a whole, keeping it alive and keep it developing. I mean, there's always going to be people saying, well, you don't have to promote. You know, there's always going to be people who seek us out. And that's true. But this is the difference between promoting the free flight sector and the perception of the free flight sector versus promotion to get people into the sport, which I also think is important. I do think we have to look at our numbers. We want to bring people in. We want to share what we do. But the first emphasis for me is the perception of free flight. This is what I think we as an association, we've got to start working on, to bring more of the public awareness to what we do, to take us off that extreme edge of the limits of what people find acceptable. You know, there are those who can do the Red Bull and the Kriegel Mauer and the walk up the side of the hill. And there's the others, a promotion that's just, it's a nice sort of easy coastal float about after work. There's everything in that spectrum that's available. But I believe at the moment we are considered at the extreme marginal sport end. And we have to make changes to how that we are perceived. So that's when I talk about promotion. But then other people are saying, well, that means you're going to get more people in, all the launches are going to be overrun, etc., etc. There are pluses and minuses, but I think there are more pluses than minuses. This is my take. But it's something that I believe we have to start working on. And as far as sort of people say, well, more people, more problems. That's quite true. But let us look back at all the work that the association has done on its safety, its reporting, its training. Let's trust that we've got the mechanisms in place to start this next phase of changing. And I think it's about time that we start looking at the future, outside of when I'm no longer flying and you're no longer flying, but what are we doing to keep what we do alive and to share it with other people? So that's where we're at with the research and rambling. So let me now go on to how I put all of these 4 things into the strategic priorities. So that's up next. So now going on to the actual strategic priorities as presented, as we'd like you guys to think about and make a vote on at the AGM. Now, I'm going to preface this by saying I understand that when people talk about strategic priorities, they are usually very specific. They're often very target focused and with details, you know, accountability and targets that you can reach. And I have to admit, I struggled greatly writing what I believe is one of the most broadest, widest strategic plan I've ever written. And again, why I struggled with this is because, again, I come from a very professional background where I've done this, done this sort of work for other targets and things like that. But I had to write it, I had to put it down in such a way, as you'll see in a minute, so broadly, because we look at how our association runs. We are volunteer. We are solely down to people getting involved and having a go and having a try. We are very thin on volunteer energy, volunteer resources and hours. I mean, in your own clubs, you'll probably know that only so many people are there to help and things like this. So to put out a highly specific set of parameters and set of targets on a strategic idea, I think, to me, and as I've written it, it would not be anywhere successful for us as an association, because we cannot hold volunteer members to account for targets and lines in the sand, if you know what I mean. So as I present the strategic points here, and we're actually taken to calling them strategic pillars, I think this is a very good starting point. And again, my apologies to those who would have different expectations of what a strategic plan is. I have taken to putting them down in this format, again, based on how our association is run and what resources we have. So again, this is the first sort of foundation. These are the pillars, what I believe that the strategic direction is going to start taking. And when I presented the first option, my first iteration of the strategic pillars, I can tell you that it had a lot of discussion on our executive. I was surprised at how it was received. So I'm also not precious on my work. So if you don't agree with what I've done, go back and tell me exactly what you think. I'm quite open to ideas. And that's exactly what happened with our executive meetings, that there were people had issues with it. And they asked me to go back with a different emphasis, which I did, which is option number 2. And also there is going to be option 3 presented at the AGM, which is we don't like option 1, we don't like option 2. Option 3 is go back and start again. So again, this is how it's come up. So what I'd like to take you through now is it's just a read through. So I presented option 1. Now, one of the, again, it's something that I've struggled with because it is so broad. So again, I try to think of these as strategic pillars. This is what we're going to start developing, and I think in the coming, year, next year, if we get let's see how things go. But I'm just trying to express how this is different to what I would normally do in a professional sense. So please bear with me and take it on board for what it is. So the overarching idea, when I looked at how we're sort of trying to encapsulate what I tried to do, so I've come up with a mission statement. So, to keep New Zealand flying as simple and accessible as possible to allow for individual freedom while improving safety through processes, training and education. Ensure the growth of the sport and ensure the joy of free flight is instilled in future generations. So that's the overarching emphasis of what each of these priorities will encompass. So that's the umbrella of which everything should sit under. And I think that's pretty much sums up what we're trying to do as an association. So, option 1 of the strategic priorities as presented. So option 1, safety. Continue to improve safety outcomes through the development of new processes, initiatives, training and education. 2, membership. Retain current membership level, reduce dropout and increase new membership by 3% each year. 3, internal communication. Develop and deliver meaningful communication with members. Publicise and promote the activities and work of the executive to members. 4, promote free flight. Actively promote the sport of free flight in all disciplines to the New Zealand public, shaping perceptions from extreme to the everyday. That's option 1. To put it in a nutshell, I would say option 1 is a more outward facing set of objectives, set of directions. Now we go on to option 2. Again, the same overarching mission statement. So the only differences, and again these are highlighted in yellow, but I will read through them again. Option 2, safety. Continue to improve safety outcomes through development of new processes, initiatives, training and education. It's great, does it? 2, strengthen and fortify current membership. Investigate current membership to identify what is sustainable level for the organisation, to better target initiatives that encourage long-term participation and engagement of members in all areas of free flight and the association activities, from active flying to governance and volunteering. 3, internal communication. Develop and deliver meaningful communication with members, publicise and promote the activities and work of the executive to members. 4, strengthen relationships with key stakeholder and regulatory groups. The association should be proactive in reaching out to key stakeholder groups across New Zealand and the world, creating valuable exchanges and ideas and processes which enhance New Zealand's understanding and development of the free flight sector. The association should seek to enhance collaboration between members and clubs, forging partnerships and engagement with other sectors, associations, land managers, owners, etc. So option 2, again to encapsulate, would be a more insular type of set of priorities. So that's when we're going to reinforce and strengthen what we already have. And that could be understanding how we do the business of the association, how we can look at retaining the value of what we already have. So also forging new links with other stakeholders. So for instance, as an example, there's a lot of threat to our airspace with the new drone operators coming in. And it's not just going to be us in the free flight. It's going to be, we have to reach out to the gliding clubs. We have to reach out to the hot air balloonists. We should be now looking at what general threats we have to us and who else in our area is going to be affected, and forming relationships around them. We should also look at strengthening connections to the Australian SAFA Association, exchange of ideas. I believe they're coming into the 149 sector as well. Again, don't quote me on that, I've just been reading bits about it. But again, option 2 is a more inward looking focus for the association. That's the main differences. The differences are in under option 2 is strengthen and fortify current membership, and the fourth, which is strengthen relationships with key stakeholders. So the details are actually clear in yellow of the two different things. And then the third option is you don't like any option 1 or option 2, telling us to go back and let me have another go at it. So that is what we want you to vote as a club at this AGM. What would be really good is, again, it's not a remit, so it's not a change to the Constitution. It will give the executive a better understanding of what focus you would like the strategic work to undertake and which direction. So what I'd hope is that when you vote as a club, you might say, hey, Auckland, we like option 1 because of X, Y, and Z. Or, hi, this is the Auckland Club, we choose option 2 because of A, B, and C. Or, hi, this is the Auckland Club and we don't like any of it. Can you go back and do another go? All of those options are perfectly fine and it gives us a direction. So they're the clear options. I will just go, and the other documents that will be attached with this are a couple of items. I should say they are documents which talk about activities which, depending on which of option 1 or option 2 is taken up, it'll be certain activities that we could run underneath those priorities as an association. So again, those details are attached to this email. I suggest you read through them. We put a lot of thought into sort of brainstorming ideas and things that the association could do as part of its work towards the new priorities. So take a read of those and let me hear what you think. Thanks guys, sticking it out. Sometimes it's easier to do this with a group because we can actually talk about it and stuff like that. So thanks for sticking around, and please get in touch. I'm still happy to do chats to your clubs directly, or if you've got any questions, just get in touch. Thanks guys.